Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. When I saw that we are going to have an anniversary this year and we're going to be celebrating, I thought, well, that's the thing I should hit on in January, is why we're having an anniversary this year, why we're going to have a celebration. And so I started digging, looking for things for 1825. And this is just a bare bones list of Orleans County, what happened in 1825. Okay, this is just the basis for us to start on. It was the first academy between Niagara and the Genesee River, was in Gaines. The completion of the canal. The Baptist Church was organized November 12, 1825. The first Norwegian settlement in the United States was in Kendall in 1825. Barry, Shelby, Knowlesville, Carlton, and Murray were beginning at that point. Richard Gordonier. Now, we've had a picture of Richard Gordonier. He was a black man who lived here in Orleans County, ran a business, worked on the canal. He and his mother were made free in 1825, and he came here and worked on the canal, which I think is kind of special too. Lafayette was in the area, Marquis de Lafayette, to look at the canal and this new construction that was going on. Orleans County was formed, and Albion became the county seat in 1825. The Orleans Advocate newspaper was begun. The first judge of common pleas was Elijah Foote, April 22nd, 1825. So we were organized enough to have a judge of common pleas. Eldridge Farwell was a judge also in 1825. Dan Pauley built Pauley Tavern in Clarendon in 1825. Sam Tappan built the first tavern in Yates Center in 1825. The first frame house was built in Lyndonville in 1825. The first circuit court was at Selah Bronson's house in Gaines in October of 1825. The first Sunday school in Yates was taught by Samuel Yates in 1825. William Glidden, driver on the New Hampshire out of Brockport on the canal in 1825. William Lewis was the sheriff of Orleans County in 1825. Governor DeWitt Clinton gave a speech in Holly at the canal in 1825. Oak Orchard was changed to Carlton in 1825. April 15, 1825, the legislature authorized raising $1,000 for a bridge at Stillwater in Carlton. So we were organized enough to vote on raising money to build a bridge. And a blacksmith shop opened in Kendall by Lyman and Norman Spicer. So I wanted you to kind of hear the number of things that were going on in 1825, 200 years ago. These things that I just read were going on in this county. I think that's pretty awesome. And I think we all understand that the big catalyst for all this was the canal, because the canal was finished in 1825. And just a few, I think some of you have heard of William Morgan, who was kind of chased down the Ridge Road for bad working with the government. Elihu Mather, who lived in Gaines, was involved in the trial for William Morgan. And he was tried for his part in the trial. He was accused of helping Morgan, but he was acquitted. He was a Gaines citizen that went up on trial in 1825. There were over 300 people who came here and settled in 1825. I think that's quite a bit. You know, you hear of, well, 3 or 4 farmers here and maybe 2 down here, but you've got over 300 people that settled here in what was to become Orleans County. And they weren't just farmers. There were blacksmiths and tanners and men who ran livery stables and any business at the time. People came here and set up in Orleans County. In 1825 in the United States, John Quincy Adams became the president. The Erie Canal opened. The Lafayette visited the canal. We know that because we've got a monument right here, a marker in Albion of his visit at the canal. William Sturgeon invented the electromagnet in 1825. And the first grand opera in the United States was sung in English, was performed in New York City. The first hotel in Hawaii opened. So we're kind of up there with lots of other things that went on. We're up in the status with what was going on in the United States. I talked about Lafayette visiting the United States. He was invited to visit the United States in 1824. During his tour, which lasted from 1824 to 25, he visited Washington, D.C., small communities across 24 states, and on June 6th and 7th, 1825, he traveled east across New York State from Lockport to Rochester on the Erie Canal. And that is where we get the marker for him being through here, was in 1825. Lafayette rode in a packet boat in a full regalia that was pulled by a team of white horses from Lockport to Rochester, June 6th and 7th, 1825. So if you were around in June in 1825, got near the canal, you could see Lafayette go by and with his team of horses. He rode a packet boat in full regalia pulled by that team of horses. And we located a marker in Albion between Ingersoll and Main Street lift bridges. The marker highlights Lafayette's journey on the Erie Canal and features Lafayette Trail logo. The Marquis de Lafayette was a French military officer and hero of the American and French Revolutions. In 1824, he visited the United States for the first time in 41 years. During his tour, he visited Washington, D.C., Monticello, and other major cities and small communities across the 24 states, our community being one. If you want to see it, this is the list. I know you can't read it from where you are, but this is the list of every place that Lafayette visited on his tour. So he got around this part of America during his trips. When I looked in the pioneer history of Orleans County, I find they list, when they first began this Pioneer Association, they wanted to know any person who was here, who came here by 1825. Anyone 1825 or earlier was considered a pioneer here in what is now Orleans County. There were 236 members that were considered pioneers, and 37 extra members who were honorarily given as pioneers, which means they might have come a couple of years later. They might have been benefiting the Pioneer Association. So we had 236 plus 37 honorary members. We have the book, The Pioneer History of Orleans County, and in one of the pages in 1890, a letter was received by Judge Noah Davis of New York. Now, Noah Davis lived here in Orleans County. It was written May 10th, 1898, and it comes from number 2 Wall Street, New York. Dear Sir, I have just received your letter inviting me to attend the annual meeting of the Orleans County Pioneer Association on the 21st of June next. I feel honored by your kind invitation. It would, I am sure, give me great pleasure to be present and participate in the exercises you mentioned. Alas, I have no time to enjoy our visit. My memory of Orleans County goes back to 1825 when my parents brought me, a boy of 7 years, to live in Albion, then Newport, more commonly called Millport, also called Mudport, because the streets were so muddy that they referred to Albion as Mudport. Perhaps I may rightly claim to be a pioneer, though I never felt myself entitled to that honor. I was a pioneer among the boys of Orleans, and those boys who still live are not merely the men, but like myself, are among the antiquities of Orleans. I can now send a patriarchal blessing to the youth and the men of Orleans who are now in its active businesses, because I have passed the allotted time of 70 and am entitled to a place, if to any, amongst both your pioneers and patriarchs. I have never yet seen the day when I could not, with genuine respect and affection, say, God bless Orleans County and her whole and generous people. Very respectfully, Noah Davis. Noah Davis was a judge, and he was invited to the celebrations and had to decline because of his other commitments. I wanted to let you know the kinds of businesses the pioneers set up. Tanyards, carriage and wagon shops, carpenters and joiners, taverns, of course, blacksmiths, clothing mills and carting, warehouses, stores, wood carvers, judges, of course, Sunday schools in Millville, Yates, and Waterport. And in 1825, an artillery company formed, trained in Murray, early military training with the Revolutionary War in the back of their minds. They had troops training in Murray in 1825. That just blew my mind when I saw that. I thought, they were still not trusting that they might not have to fight once again for the United States. And so they were training in Murray for that possibility. The Erie Canal, prior to the canal opening, it took 6 weeks to get across the state. So if you started in Albany and wanted to go to Buffalo, it took you 6 weeks. Once the canal was finished, people could travel between Albany and Buffalo in 8 days. Quite a difference. Passengers using packet boats found them much more pleasurable than stagecoaches. So you can see, it was really modern technology. It was the airplane of the day. It was, you didn't have to drive across country. You could take a train, you could take an airplane. Well, this was the cutting edge of the day, the canal. Jacob Andrus settled here in 1814, and his son Enoch was at Holly when the celebrations took place over the Erie Canal in 1825. Squire Wood of Hulberton was marshal of the day. The band, a marshal, one, Samuel Coy of Clarendon, the fifer. The speaking by Clinton was on the bridge, and a line boat was finally decorated, the crowd in attendance very large for those days. If we had one of the Hogarth's paintings of this group, what a scene. Enoch took a trip in the first regular line boat from Lockport to Albion. When he was about 20 years of age, he walked with a score of others to Byron, on to Batavia, up the old turnpike road to Buffalo to see the Thayer brothers hung. They stopped for the night about 5 miles from Buffalo, and in their journey found taverns every few miles, the whole distance. At this time, Buffalo was a small village and the hanging took place on the west side of Main Street near Terrace, and all the boats in the harbor were covered with people witnessing the execution. So we had something to go see in Buffalo. There was a rope stretched across the street to keep back the crowd from the prisoners, and these three were placed on a plank, and when they dropped, there was a generous cry of, "Oh!" The criminals chose their own length of rope, and the coffins were placed under them. The great crowd ate up all that the village of Buffalo could supply, and Enoch and his friends were in the streets all night without lodging, the weather quite cold for June. The next day, 15 of the party went to the falls and stayed in a barn overnight. The village was deserted on account of sickness. For 1/2 mile before reaching the falls, the country was a wilderness. The party passed through Lewiston to Lockport, which was a little village, and took a line boat below the locks, which was drawn by 2 horses, the canal only a ditch. So you can see the canal was something that modern technology, we were going to be able to go to Lockport, go to Rochester on these boats, and they aren't bumpy like stagecoaches. They're smooth, and we don't have to do anything about making them work. They're driven for us. William Glidden wrote his memories of the canal. Jeremiah Cogswell of Brockport was my captain on the New Hampshire of Brockport in 1825, and I was the driver. The boat was about 80 feet in length and 17 in width, and the horses were carried in the stern with a temporary stable hung on. So they transported the horses also on the canal boats. This boat would carry about 700 barrels of flour and drew 3 feet of water. I made 3 rounds from Buffalo to Albany and Brockport. We would be about 18 to 20 days on a full trip. I received $8 a month as driver. In 1829, I was on a line boat, Cogswell the owner, Joshua Bailey the first captain, and Church the second. He was from Jefferson County. We had 2 horses on the line boat at each station, from 12 to 20 miles apart. We had a stern cabin and also a bow cabin on this boat. At one time, we carried 300 Dutch in the center of the boat. In 1829, Brockport was about the size of Clarendon, with 1 grocery and several stores. The grocery was kept by one Webster. Utica about the same size as Rochester, and Syracuse as large as Holly at present, and Schenectady also. I saw the first cars at Schenectady. Utica we called the best town on the canal. We had good living on the boat, and the board in the cabin was about 30 cents a meal. On the line boat, I was bowman at $18 a month, and I waited on the passengers and got milk at the stations. We had a black man for cook, who was not allowed in the bow cabin. The stern cabin was for officers of the boat. We had room for 40 in the bow cabin, with berths on both sides, the men and women separate. I ran on the line boat from Albany to Buffalo. We charged the 300 Dutch $300 for their passage, and were 8 days on the trip. The steersman would get $18 to $20 per month. I was off and on the line boat 13 years. I bought a boat in the 40s and made 3 round trips and cleared $1,100 in one trip. I was away from home 2 months and saved $1,400. So, you know, we think of, oh, those nice little boats going up and down the canal. It was a business. It was serious stuff. I think the thing that surprised me, I guess because of my spoiled 21st century attitude, was that much profited people. People made big money on the canal, running those boats back and forth. Also, the other thing that started around that time was sandstone quarries. A lot of the sandstone was discovered as they were digging the canal. They would come across these collections of sandstone in the ground, And the idea came across, yeah, other people would buy this for building. So you started another new business because of the canal. The sandstone industry in Orleans County was essentially begun by John Ryan. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1801. His family originally came from Ireland and had been in this country for a number of years. His father was a veteran of the Revolutionary War and had discharge papers signed by none other than George Washington. John was trained as a master mason, and after arriving in Medina in 1825, proceeded to apply his trade through the area. In 1836, New York State approved plans to enlarge the Erie Canal. John Ryan was hired as the contractor to replace all the bridge abutments along the canal between Lockport and Albion. So one of our own became one of the essential people who helped to enlarge the canal. I mentioned before that there was the first Norwegian settlement in Kendall in the whole United States. We were the first place to have Norwegian immigrants settle. 52 sloopers, the first group of Norwegian immigrants to North America, departed on July 4th, 1825. 53 arrived in New York City on October 9th, a baby having been born en route. Their 54 feet long sloop, the Restoration, exceeded the maximum of 16 passengers allowed by under U.S. maritime law. The boat was therefore impounded, the captain arrested, and a $3,150 fine levied. However, President John Quincy Adams pardoned them. The sloopers traveled up the Hudson River and along the newly completed Erie Canal, meeting Governor DeWitt Clinton and the Seneca chief en route to Holly, where they disembarked near this site in late October. They continued on foot to Lake Ontario in what is now the town of Kendall, where slooper Glenn Pearson had bought land for them. One of theirs remained in New York to sell the sloop. By the time he reached Albany, the canal was closed for the season. So how was he to get from Albany to Kendall? He ice skated the 290 miles to Holly, the longest such feat in history. Can you imagine ice skating down the canal from Albany to Holly? I mean, there ought to be a plaque there somewhere. You know, we've got a plaque, you know, but I mean, I think he deserves a bigger one. 290 miles he skated. I couldn't believe it when I read it. He was a spiritual leader of at least 28 sloopers affiliated with the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers. Yeah.
Did he stop at any point?
Well, I would assume that he had to. He had to have something to eat, and I had to go potty, I would think. But 290 miles on my feet on a pair of skates? I don't think so. But I think that's wanting to get to Kendall.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when I read how far he is. He skated. I couldn't believe it. Most of the other followers were Lutheran dissenting pastor Hans Hogg. They were fleeing religious persecution in Norway. Later, Larson built his house in Rochester Atkinson Street and became a successful canal boat builder. But I still, every time I think of the Norwegian settlement, I'm going to think of that. Richard Knudsen wrote an article about them, which essentially says what I've already told you. And he was instrumental when there was a group of Norwegian people that came here in the 1990s, I think, or late 80s, to visit where their Norwegian ancestors first settled in America. And Richard Knudsen was involved in showing them around and explaining where Kendall was and explaining to them. I think probably I could read what he has, but I think probably it's essentially what I've already told you. This tells a little bit more. This is the first chapter of Norwegian immigration. In Orleans County, the leader of the party, Lars Larson, sent his wife and daughter on with the rest of the sloop party to Kendall, and he himself remained for several weeks in New York City to disperse the sloop and its cargo. So that's the man's name who came late from New York City. He finally succeeded in selling both for the paltry sum of $400. He sold the boat. By this time, winter had set in, and in the early days of December, he set out to join his family. The canal was frozen, and he had escaped from Albany to Holly in Orleans County. I still, that's the best part of the whole story. To think that he was devoted enough to sell the boat and to escape from Albany to Kendall. He prospered, and in a short time he was able to go into business for himself as a canal boat builder. So after his travel from Albany here on foot, he built a canal boat, and he ran a canal boat. He lost his life by an accident in November of 1845 while on his way to New York with a canal boat, which he intended to sell. There's also a suspicion that he was foully dealt with. He died from a fall from the boat into the canal, and his family believed that someone must have struck him and pushed him overboard. There never was a thorough investigation into the matter, and I simply report the views of the children now living. He'd given his children a good education, and on his death he left them not a fortune, but a handsome competency for maintaining the old home. So he actually died from his canal boat. The canal was definitely connected to this poor man. I think, too, the thing that surprised me was this was the first Norwegian settlement in the whole United States. It was here in our county, in Kendall. I think that's amazing. So anybody have any questions? I could go on a long time, but I won't. Yeah.
A couple.
Yeah.
The bridge, you said there was, the first bridge that was built was, it sounded like Carlton?
There was a bridge that was built over the creek in Carleton.
Okay.
Not in the canal.
So it wasn't one of the big, right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't one of the big bridges.
No, it was a smaller bridge.
It was
one of the first bridges
okay.
built over that. Yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, what were you able to ascertain about how much Native American presence there was at that time?
I haven't run across a lot of Native American in what we consider Orleans County now. I don't know, Bill, do you know, were they more south of us? I've not read much about Indians in this area at all, Native Americans.
Well, there were Native Americans I know down in, Point Breeze and that those.
Yeah, there were little bunches here and there.
But I don't know if they were still around when the time period you're talking.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't think they were here long.
No.
Were they? Because you don't find them mentioned in much of the history. You don't hear about Chief so-and-so coming into Kendall or whatever.
Right.
Just the fact that they were there at the opening up of this area, but didn't stay.
Yeah.
And I think, too, you find also the reservations were made early too. Maybe not to the extent that we know them today. But with the pioneers coming in here, they were pushing them
They needed a place to
into
be.
yeah, and our government made reservations. May not be the way we look at them today, but they were areas where the Indians were to move to allow these settlers to come in.
No gas stations or cigarettes.
Yeah, no, hadn't gotten that far yet. Yeah.
I missed a lot, I'm sorry, but the Knudsen, was he, did he live in that Knudsen family on 279? Is that the family you're talking about, Richard Knudsen?
Knudsen?
Yeah.
He was here in Orleans County, wasn't he?
Well, yes, was he a professor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
was that?
I only knew him a short time. Bill knew him more than I
Was
did.
that Ivan's father?
Yes.
Oh,
I
okay.
do know where they live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if that was the one they were talking about.
Yeah,
Wasn't he a professor somewhere, was that?
Rockport.
In Brockport, yeah, and that's why he spoke to the Norwegian people who came here to look at where the first Norwegians settled.
They were Norwegian descent, Richard Knudsen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he was Norwegian
I
too,
wanted to be sure.
which was the connection between him and the visitors that
Yeah.
came were, because he was Norwegian descent. Anybody else?
I was thinking that they maybe came this way because they had a boat and the canal was open, so they could continue on a boat, which they used to being at. So
Right.
this was a good way of coming.
Yeah, the canal got not, the point I think is they had this man come ahead of them
Yes.
and purchase land for them to settle on. Now, he must have had a connection locally with someone on that side of the county. You know what I'm saying? He must have known someone. I haven't read who he knew, but he purchased land in Kendall. So I'm thinking someone in Kendall or that area knew him, or he met them and they offered to sell him land. Because they eventually did move from here and ended up in Illinois and Michigan and moved west of here. That's why there's only, half a dozen related to the original Norwegian settlers that are still in the Kendall area.
Was it Minnesota where, I remember the Golden Girls and.
Yeah.
Was it Minnesota that a lot of them ended up, the Norwegians?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't traced them enough to know. I know that they moved from here to Michigan and Illinois and that New West.
Yeah.
At the time was from Michigan down, was the West. So that's where they went. But I think too, the implication was they had more farmland rather than forest, because north of the ridge, it was forest. They called it the Black North because you couldn't see the sun because there were so many trees. So I think there was a call to where we can go and plant right away. We can raise food, we can raise crops. Where Kendall, they had to cut every tree down in order to get plowable land. So I think that, I'm not saying that's the reason why, but I think in looking at that time period, I think that might have been a draw to go out west. Anybody else?
I said, as usual, he sent his wife ahead to do
Yeah.
the work to get set up there.
Well, of course.
Well, he stayed in New York.
Yeah.
It took me so long to sell the boat.
Well, he had business to conduct, she had to make the meals, I mean, come on. Yeah.
Probably had 10 kids too.
Yeah. Details. Yeah, Bill.
Kim had a question about the bridge
Yeah,
over Old Orchard River. I think that would have been just downstream from the present-day Archers Club.
okay,
Because the original Old Orchard Road, coming from Batavia North, when it got to Five Corners, split down Route
Yeah.
279.
right,
and crossed down northeast of Waterport,
Waterport, yeah.
Orchard Creek there, and then angled along the west, more or less west side of Oak Orchard River down to Oak Orchard.
Okay.
The bridge was there, the
Yeah.
original bridge, I think.
So,
I think because if you think about it, the water was there. I mean, no matter where you went right around that area, there was water. You needed bridges to cross those waterways to get down to your property or the property you had purchased. And I think of the bridges.
well, Lake Alice was dammed up, wasn't it? So-
1990.
Yeah, that was
so
later.
you didn't need anything to cross that.
Not much, just a very low bridge, steep embankment out of Waterport north,
Yeah,
angled along the south side of the creek, and then angled up to where 279 curves there by it.
because there wasn't really a lake
Right.
there.
Just a stream through there.
It was just a stream that
Just a stream
eventually
through there.
became,
Yeah.
because we blocked it up, became a lake.
There's houses even down there. The
Yeah.
house I lived in was one that was moved and several houses were put together.
Uh-huh.
on the bay.
Yeah, yeah, I can understand that.
The foundry down in there too,
Is it?
there was.
Yeah, well, that would have been a place where people would have settled, and they would have had a foundry or a mill or the works to build an income. And that would have been some of the early pioneer type income, the foundry and the mill, and you know. And a lot of them would have needed the water to run. So you would have wanted to settle near water. Anybody else? Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. So we're off and running for 2025.